Hello everyone, thank you for checking out my YouTube channel, The Study of Antiquity and the Middle Ages. My name is Nick Barksdale and I'm excited to announce that I am bringing you another episode from the History of the Papacy podcast, brought to you by none other than Steve. I'm really excited about this one. It is actually the follow-up episode to the economic policies and reforms of Diocletian that we actually discussed in the last one, and this one is actually going to deal with the politics and government of Diocletian. What I really enjoyed about this one is it really goes in depth on his provincial reorganization, him creating the Tetrarchy, and then eventually the collapse of that Tetrarchy itself in the midst of the civil wars that would occur, in which Constantine would become the established ruler of the Roman Empire. I think many of you are really going to enjoy this one because it deals with social history, economics, politics, warfare. It's really got all the good ones in one video. And what's very interesting is it will also briefly touch on the persecution of the Christians, and not just under Diocletian, but more specifically involving Galerius. I'm really excited to be able to bring this to y'all, and honestly, this channel, The Study of Antiquity in the Middle Ages, is in debt to the History of the Papacy podcast, and Steve has been very gracious. Very awesome guy. Definitely check out the links below in the video description and support the History of the Papacy podcast. Follow their stuff, check out their sites, give him some great reviews and some stars, and definitely take advantage of the awesome treasure trove of information that he provides. I definitely hope that you all enjoy this video. Definitely take some notes. It's going to be a very interesting presentation, and here at the Study of Antiquity in the Middle Ages, I wish you all a wonderful week, a wonderful weekend, and I really do appreciate the support and the encouragement that I constantly receive from my subscribers. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful day.
Sidetrack Episode 7, Politics and Government of Diocletian. Welcome back to the History of the Papacy podcast. I am, as always, Steve, your host for this podcast about the history of the popes of Rome. This is an installment of our Sidetrack episodes, where we take a closer look at some of the fascinating characters, events, and anything else that is interesting on the subject of the popes of Rome, but somewhat tangential. In the last Sidetrack episode, we discussed the economic policies of Diocletian in great detail, possibly too much detail for some tastes, but I think you will see all this discussion of Diocletian's reform policies really apply to the history of the bishops of Rome. The fiscal and monetary policies of Diocletian will set the landscape for the economic situation in Western Europe for centuries, possibly a millennium or more after Diocletian's reign as Roman emperor. Diocletian and his administration also made a great number of reforms in the political realm as well. All of these changes and reforms will directly influence how the bishops of Rome and really all of European Christendom will interact with the civil government. This interaction between civil and religious government will differ in various places where Christianity set roots. For our purposes right now, we will be primarily concerned for the moment how this relationship will evolve in the Roman Empire. But the relationship between religion and civil government, or church and state, is going to change significantly in both the West and the East. How we view the nature and role of religion in secular society today can be traced back to this time. I'm admittedly not the biggest fan of Diocletian out there. You've got the whole religious and economic persecution, not to mention authoritarianism thing. But even I have to give Diocletian credit for realizing the system was completely broken and that something bold had to be done to fix it. My opinion is that Constantine is the one who really fixed it, borrowing and adapting from Diocletian. But we will discuss this much, much, much more in depth later. Some of the changes Diocletian instituted were a long time in the making, but others were truly revolutionary. What is most surprising to me is that Diocletian was not the guy that you would think of as the typical revolutionary reformer. There isn't a ton of information on Diocletian's background or childhood, but he certainly wasn't very well educated, although he did get great on-the-job training working his way up through many various military and governmental positions. Diocletian was significantly more than a barracks general who hit the lottery and wound up emperor. Instead, Diocletian slowly worked his way up the ranks and must have been taking notes along the way. The Roman Empire went through a long period of chaos, and for the most part, Diocletian worked some of the toughest neighborhoods of the empire. He fought barbarians on the Rhine, and even grew up in what seems to me one of the most beautiful places on earth, but also one of the most fought over areas, the Adriatic coast of the Balkan Peninsula. The area of modern-day Croatia and the surrounding former Yugoslavia was an important area for military recruitment in the Roman Empire. This is where Diocletian came from, born of peasant stock. The military was the way to go up in the world, and for centuries to come, many Roman emperors would come from this area. Diocletian came in and tried to reform almost every aspect of imperial administration. We've already mentioned the economic reforms, so let's dive into the political reforms he instituted. The Roman Empire was large and had very diverse populations, geographies, languages, and cultures. It was very much an empire, not a unified country. The area of the Roman Empire was about 1/4 of, say, the area of the United States, believe it or not. But the Roman Empire did not exercise a great deal of centralized control over most of the area she controlled. Latin was a lingua franca, but it wasn't necessarily the language everyone understood. Roman culture and Romanization was all over the place and ran deep, but local cultures and languages were the basis of most areas in the empire, especially the further you went from the Mediterranean. Most people, especially in the lower classes, would have identified with their local ethnic identity over a grander idea of being Roman. This is especially true among non-citizens. Now, we aren't even talking about the strong Greek influence of the East either. Diocletian, or his advisors, who knows really who was pushing these reforms, needed to get the empire more under central control. The idea to create more central authority was very innovative in the empire game. In order to centralize authority, the actual responsibilities of the emperor were split among 4 people. Diocletian devised a situation where there would be 2 senior emperors with the title of Augustus. One Augustus would manage the western portion of the empire, and the other Augustus would supervise the eastern end. Under each individual Augustus would be a Caesar, who in turn would supervise a quarter of the empire, but would answer to his Augustus, who was overall responsible for that half. The whole system was called the Tetrarchy, or Rule of 4. There was a hierarchy, but they were brother emperors. The idea was these local emperors would be able to react to problems much more quickly than a single emperor living in Rome. These tetrarchs also moved their capitals closer to the borders or hotspots. The idea was not to have 4 separate empires, but instead to have an empire that had an administration that was more adaptable, flexible, and had the ability to more quickly deal with local problems. The new system was also meant to address one of the biggest problems the Roman Empire had really since its founding: how one emperor could pass his authority to the next. Succession crises happened so often it was ridiculous. Listen to Mike Duncan's History of Rome or read any book on the Romans, and it's just one crisis after another on who would be the next emperor. This emperor picks an able successor based on merit. This emperor has his lunatic oldest son take over, or the old emperor was assassinated and a totally different imperial line was installed after a long series of civil wars. There really was no rhyme or reason how a new government took over, which oftentimes made the transition utter chaos. Diocletian's system was meant to regularize this system and eliminate the chaos and crises of succession. What was supposed to happen was when the senior emperor, the Augustus, died or retired, the Caesar of that part of the empire would move up into place as the senior Augustus for that half of the empire, and then the newly minted Augustus picked his Caesar based on merit and ability. Sounds like a pretty good system, right? Well, as it would happen, the system never worked as planned, not even for one transition. Here's a thumbnail sketch on how the system started and where it went completely wrong. The original Tetrarchy was Diocletian as the senior Augustus, running things out of Nicomedia in Asia Minor, and Maximian as junior Augustus in the West. Maximian's Caesar was Constantius Chlorus, Constantine the Great's father. Diocletian's Caesar was a general named Galerius, whose region of control was Egypt, Syria, and Palestine. In other words, the heartland of Christianity. Galerius really hated the Christians, and when we get into the persecution of Diocletian, it could easily enough be called the persecution of Galerius. The system seems to be doing pretty well so far, right? Well, it completely falls apart during the first transition of power. Diocletian wants to do the right thing and make this first transition smooth, so he retires and forces his partner Maximian to retire as well. The last thing on God's green earth Maximian wants to do is retire. He was just getting into the game, but he did retire. Constantius Chlorus moves up to Augustus in the west, and Galerius does the same in the east. Everything's going to plan, but not quite. Galerius selects a man named Maximin Daia as his Caesar, but Galerius also selects Constantius Chlorus's Caesar. That was completely out of bounds, and in round one, Diocletian's system completely fails. Constantine was essentially a hostage in Galerius's court in the east. The Tetrarchy was completely intertwined together. Everyone married each other's daughters or sisters, and they also kept other tetrarchs' children or loved ones in their court as a quote-unquote honored guest, but they were really hostages to keep everyone honest. Constantine constantly requested to leave Galerius's court so that he could join his dad, but Galerius said no way. Galerius wasn't going to let the son of his nominal imperial brother, but really a major threat, waltz back to his father. Galerius was going to hold on to that trump card. In all the confusion, though, Constantine found a way to escape and caught up with Constantius Chlorus in northwestern Europe. Constantius Chlorus wound up dying not too long afterward, and Constantius's troops proclaimed Constantine full-blown Augustus. That's it. Diocletian's system goes down in a flaming ball of wreckage. Diocletian wanted to avoid the civil wars that had nearly destroyed the empire over the past 100 years or so, but instead, his system caused a major civil war. Constantine will come out on top of all these struggles and be the sole emperor of East and West. Not only that, but he will make the religion that Diocletian despised, if not quite the official religion of the empire, at least for the moment the preferred religion. One other reform Diocletian instituted to the political governmental system was completely reorganizing the provinces of the empire. He split most provinces in two, which made the number of provinces double from about 50 to around 100. Each of these new, smaller provinces were divided into a number of smaller administrative units called dioceses. Diocletian was trying to stabilize the administration of the empire and strengthen the ability of the central government to effect control over the locality. The problem was this reform was extremely expensive and added greatly to the economic problems of the central government. See the previous Sidetrack episode on Diocletian's economic reforms for more information. The diocese would eventually develop into the church's basic administrative unit. More than likely, the bishop took over control from the civilian leadership of the diocese as time went by, and Christianity became the undisputed major religious force in the empire. We have a merging of political and religious authority in the office of the bishop. The system Diocletian devised also brought something new to the Roman government system. Now the emperors dropped any pretense they ruled in the name of the Senate, the people, or any of that. No, the emperors answered directly to the gods. They were the representative of the gods on earth and answered to no earthly authority. Later, emperors and kings are going to grab onto this concept. Constantine is going to change which god is the one he answered to, but he will use the same basic concept of who he answers to as Diocletian. The popes of Rome are going to use this idea of answering only to God and deriving power from God as the basis of their power. Diocletian was called Lord and Master and took all the trappings we think of as a Byzantine emperor receiving. In the East, where there will be a Roman emperor for over 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Empire, the religious and secular power will be split between the high-ranking bishops and the emperor. But in the West, things will be different. There won't be an emperor, yeah, sure. There will be a Holy Roman Emperor and all that, but we'll get into that soon enough. But we will see the bishops of Rome will absorb both secular and religious leadership roles. The history of Europe will be a massive tug-of-war between secular lords, kings, dukes, princes on one side and religious leaders, popes, patriarchs, and bishops on the other. We need to discuss the political and economic landscape of the Roman Empire at this point because it is the setting for the next several centuries of European history. Now, this is when the history of the papacy really starts to get interesting. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, go to the Facebook page, History of the Papacy Podcast, the website, a2zhistorypage.libsyn.com, or email me at historyofthepapacypodcast@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on our next stop on our trip through the history of the Roman popes.